It is the morning after. I guess you can always say that. Welcome in, Dave Trafford here. It is the Writ Race, the Ontario Politics Podcast. Normally we'd be calling it On the Ledge, but that's the weekly effort. This is the daily approach to the Ontario election campaign. And we're all set to vote. I guess you can vote just about any time now. The final voting day is June the 2nd. And then we'll read the entrails on the 3rd, the Friday morning. And then maybe take a break. Right? Yeah, I know. Talked about that voter fatigue yesterday on the show. How COVID is playing into it. I'm thinking we're all looking forward to our summer. In the meantime, we're in the sprint, heading for that first couple of days of June. And away we go. So we're happy to welcome in John Wright from Murrow Public Opinion. Sabrina Nanji is the Queen's Park Observer. I'm Dave Trafford. And, I always like to say, quote my buddy Barry Shepley. Barry was the national triathlon coach. He coached Simon Whitfield to gold in Sydney. The very first gold medal won in the Olympics for triathlon. And Barry's advice is always eat the frog first. Start the day and eat the frog. And that's to get the stuff out of the way, get the dirty stuff out of the way. So let's talk about this debate in North Bay, shall we? I think that most of us expected, Sabrina, that this was going to be a bit of a snooze fest. I heard Tim Hudak on the radio yesterday, I guess, suggesting that this is kind of like about, moose tags and, whether or not they're going to have train service in and through various parts of the region. And then I heard him this morning talking about it. He said, I'm still kind of on that, but he was a little surprised because the moderator, it would appear, called an audible a couple of times and shifted some of the questions. They had prepared questions. The leaders knew what was coming, and then he kind of torqued the questions a little bit. So Tim was, thought that added a little bit of spice, but wouldn't have been all that impressed as a leader. Overall, I think this discussion in North Bay probably surprised a few people. It was more than they expected.
Yeah, I think I was maybe among those people who thought it might be a little bit of a snooze fest. And I think some would argue it still kind of was. Like, we did have some of the same old talking points from the party. The premier was, Doug Ford, conservative leader, was reading off of prepared notes at some points. But yeah, they did get a little candid. There were some fireworks, especially you mentioned train service, but the Northlander restoring that is a huge political hot potato up north. Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca actually got some boos when he mentioned it from the crowd. Of course, he was part of the Liberal government that canceled it, and now he's pledging to bring it back. But I think overall, this kind of turned into Ford versus Del Duca, and NDP leader Andrea Horwath trying to chime in like anytime she could, which I think is interesting because the NDP, if we go by the current standings, like they would be the party to beat in the north. They've got the most seats there, especially the far north. Horwath, got the loudest cheers. Clearly, there was the biggest crowd, outside the Capitol Center in North Bay cheering her on. A lot of union supporters there. I think Ford had maybe about a dozen people, a smaller crowd. But don't forget, this is also Vic Fideli's territory, longtime PC MPP and minister. He's very well liked there. And I think, is on track to win re-election. But yeah, I think there was plenty of off the cuff moments. I think Doug Ford got some attention for saying you didn't build absolutely nothing, not the most smoothest of phrases, but also I think, people who call that out, his mannerisms, his way of speaking, that tends to work in his favor. That's like, it kind of just shows he's much of an everyman. We've all, even myself, can stumble when we're on front and center. There I am doing it. I think my sleeper pick for the debate was Mike Schreiner. It was Stephen Del Duca's first time as leader on this type of debate stage, but also the first time Mike Schreiner as the lone Green MPP had a spot too. And I thought he was pretty clear, unequivocal in many of his responses, but he's got virtually no chance of forming government. And so it was interesting, I think, when when we saw Horwath side with him quite a bit, perhaps in the hopes of taking some attention away from her PC and Liberal rivals who are both giving her and the NDP a run for their money, if we pay attention to the polls.
Well, yeah, I want to come back to Mike Schreiner in a minute, but John, it occurred to me as I watched it, and I'll full disclosure here, I watched the Leaf game last night and sat in my studio so I wouldn't disturb the rest of the house screaming at the television. And then to calm down, I watched the CPAC replay of the debate. I mean, that's where my head was. And I got to say, I agree with Sabrina in terms of Schreiner's response. But the thing that occurred to me as I watched this, it sounded as if Andrea Horwath was running to be the opposition leader. At least Del Duca was taking a shot at being premier.
Don't disagree with you on that one. In fact, the biggest thing that came out of the debate for me was why Mike Schreiner is not the head of the NDP. I mean, for my goodness sake. I mean, you sit back and you kind of go, I know philosophically where these folks are at.
Well, at 9:01 on election night, he might be.
Well, that's the point. And you know what? You can either, stand for your ideals and you can be in the wilderness, literally, as a Green Party member and never get any more than 1 or 2 seats until the planet is on fire and people now turn to you when you can't do anything anyways. The reality is that he was great yesterday. He's articulate. He's self-effacing. He could be in the NDP chair and driving, a real party to make a difference. So that was the first thing. Andrea Horwath, man, oh man, what a tired lament. Say no more. Doug Ford, I thought, did fine. I mean, he's the premier. He has to get out of it okay. We always, say that if you're the leader, don't screw up. Just get through it. And he did well. And Stephen Del Duca did well. I thought, to your point, Sabrina, he rose to the occasion. He was fine. He was measured. He was better in the scrum afterwards. But I thought he did pretty well, too. Question, at the end of the day, does any of this matter? From polling point of view, I've done it both ways. I've polled people who have been recruited beforehand to watch the debate and then to tell us who won and then to publish the numbers. And then I've watched, the following day, and I've done polling on who people thought actually won, who didn't see the debate. The reality is that anybody who watches this, it doesn't really matter what they think of the debate. It happens the next day when the media declares whether you won, you lost, or you got on with it, and people go, yay, I'm glad I didn't watch it. I don't know what you had in your dreams last night, Dave, but I certainly watched it before the game, and I felt better and got to sleep, and I had no more nightmares. So, I think the party leaders, for the most part, acquitted themselves. There's no headlines this morning, no screw-ups. Life goes on. But I think the biggest thing out of that for me was just why Mike Schreiner has not stepped over and is going to take over the NDP. He would be very comfortable, I think, running that party.
Well, how important is that to start? I mean, really, literally, we're in the first full week of the campaign to be able to say the premier was the premier. Okay, well, we kind of got what we would have expected from Doug Ford. And that's not a criticism. It's just sort of a, benign comment on his performance. But to point out the exceptional response that Mike Schreiner's getting and the above expectation mark that Del Duca gets. Sabrina, does that change any of the calculus as we move towards debate day?
Well, I'm going to be interested to see, what the polls say. But I think us at Queen's Park who are reporting there, outside of the campaign period, we know Mike Schreiner punches above his weight. He's always quick to respond to whatever the government's doing. He, just as a sole MPP. And of course, he doesn't have official party status, which means you don't get the same amount of legislative resources or time in the House, staff to help you with research and understand bills. And yet, that party is really turning it out. And so I think it's interesting to see their strategy, too. They're obviously targeting their resources in certain areas where they think they can pick up. That was their strategy in 2018 in Guelph, where Schreiner represents. And so that we're seeing a little bit more of that, too. He's there almost every day so far. It's early days in the campaign, but he's always making a point to go door knocking and glad hand around there. They're also kind of targeting University Rosedale, NDP territory, previously Liberal bastion, where high-profile candidate Diane Sachs is running, the former environmental watchdog. They're pushing in Beaches, East York, and also Kitchener, where federally Ontario elected the first Green MP in September. So maybe they think they can make up some ground there. But they haven't really budged very much in the polls. They're kind of around 4 or 5%. And just anecdotally, what I've been hearing from people is that, if I was going to vote, I would vote Green, but I know they have no chance of winning. And so I think that overcoming that is going to be a huge thing. And on Del Duca, I think the onus was on him, and especially next Monday when we have the province-wide leaders debate at TVO on Monday night. It's going to be up to him. He's trying to rebrand himself. Like Horwath and Ford were, punching him on past Liberal decisions. I mentioned the Northlander cancellation. He was actually, booed for that. And he's saying, I'm the new face of the party. This is like a rebrand. There's someone new at the helm, and so we're going to do things differently. Of course, Ford said he was transportation minister and didn't do anything when he was in power. So I think he's trying to reintroduce himself to voters. And whether or not he did that, I guess we'll see. But, if we're paying attention to some of the polls, including that Nanos one, that, as people get to know Del Duca a little bit more, as people are paying more attention to him, the Liberals are still sitting in a pretty comfortable position, I think, and on track right now in most of the polls we're seeing and aggregates to form official opposition. So, of course, I think campaigns matter. I think debates matter. And it was an interesting analysis from Abacus Data. I'll just add, saying that the desire for change metric hasn't really moved that much, and it's not as high as we saw in 2018. Of course, change election, which helped the NDP, form official opposition with 40 seats. That hasn't changed. Those voters that want change aren't really united. They're kind of split between the NDP and the Liberals. So I think right now this could be a chance to galvanize the progressive parties either way, the NDP or the Liberals, especially after reading, the Conservatives doing so well in the polls. This might actually help get out the vote on that front. But I think that's going to be the challenge for the opposition parties right now.
So let's look at specifically at the North, where, I was on with Mark Toohey last night on Ontario Votes, and we were talking about some of the battleground ridings, and particularly looking at the North and Southwestern Ontario. And that's where sort of the NDP, if they lose half of those seats, they're in trouble. And John, you look at the Thunder Bay ridings, for example, where it's a slim margin that they won by, they won there, and the Liberals hung on. So even in the collapse of the Liberal government last year, Michael Gravel still won. He's not running again. But we look at those places where they benefited because the Liberal vote collapsed in the last election. This time, I think those ridings are certainly in jeopardy. And then that puts, the NDP and their position certainly on a knife's edge. So it may not be, all of our attention on the 905, but this is where the decision as to who will be the official opposition may well play out.
Yeah, well, take a look at Jill Anders in Toronto. I mean, the riding of St. Paul's went NDP. That was a total fluke. And it's going to go back now. It's funny in St. Paul's, where I live, they just run doctors. It's just hilarious. I mean, Dr. Carolyn Bennett, Dr. Eric Hoskins, now Dr. Stahl. I mean, they even have on his literature that comes in your door, the Liberal literature, where he's standing in front of Queen's Park in kind of a T-shirt, and he looks great with the background. He's wearing a stethoscope around his neck, like he just got off his bike, and he's got a stethoscope around his neck. They just run doctors here, so he'll probably win. But to your point, Dave, there's a case there where in the last election campaign, the NDP numbers were about 8 points ahead of where they are right now. So they were doing just fine. Now the Liberals, in fact, have made up that ground. And Mr. Del Duca, in fact, is going to achieve, I think, what their high water mark was going to be for this election. He's going to come back in as the leader of the opposition. He'll have official party status. All of a sudden, he'll have staff and money that comes from the legislature. But to your point, the ones that the NDP gobbled up with a small margin last time, I think, are going to switch and go back. They'll be Liberal this time out.
So when we look at the performance, people were, as you point out, Sabrina, making much of Doug Ford's, stumbles in terms of some of his answers. And I had a laugh. I heard Thomas Mulcair talking about it. The answer starts here and you're never quite sure where it's going to end, right? So it drives audio editors just crazy when you're trying to do that kind of stuff. But he is the get her done guy. So I don't think that's much of an issue. Although I heard Laura Babcock talking about it, and afterwards I went back and watched it again. There were points where, Del Duca made a comment and targeted Doug Ford, and Ford got a little. He didn't answer, but you could tell he was pissed off. I mean, he wasn't prepared to take that from anybody, let alone Stephen Del Duca. So I think yesterday, John, after we got off the podcast, was commenting, there are three people here who really don't like each other, and you got to wonder how much that's going to play into this moving forward. And if you can push somebody off their game, just get under their skin a little bit, that might be enough to make a difference in some of these key ridings.
Yeah, and just to, Ford's mannerisms, he's got a ton of phrases. Like when he was doing press conferences almost every day at the height of the pandemic, we got, the best Fordisms, if I can put it that way. The cheese slipped off the crackers, the yahoos. I think he even said, there are people doing cartwheels at Airbnbs, and short-term rentals, which is obviously an issue in the North, and that came up in the debate. I don't think that, making fun or teasing Doug Ford, I think that can end up working in his favor. I think it can be rather endearing to, average voters. People like to vote for someone they feel they can have a beer with, and Ford is definitely that guy. And I'm sure if he could have huge Ford fests, he would be doing that right now. And he's not as good as maybe the others in, being a bit stiff at the podium. He was the only leader that didn't scrum with us after the debate, whereas the opposition leaders, they scrummed for a very long time. And kudos to them for that. But I think it also kind of speaks to the opposition leaders having a hard time getting their message out there. Ford is the type of, bull in a china shop politician that is being, the opposition leaders are forced to kind of respond to what he's doing. And so he's still in the spotlight. He's still eating up all the oxygen in the room. And you're kind of forced to play defense or criticize what he's doing or saying, some of his actions, rather than talking about yourself. And of course, in governing times, when you're official opposition, that's your job to hold them, to hold the PC leader to account. But when you're in a campaign and you're trying to present yourself as the, premier in waiting, that it makes the opposition leaders' jobs a bit more difficult. I mean, of course, there's no love lost between any of them. And so I thought that it was probably a bit calculated when Horwath was saying, I agree with Schreiner. He's kind of the guy that everybody loves, I guess. But yeah, I think, some of these things are working in Ford's favor when he's a bit more off the cuff.
So let's get to your 901 story, because you read that this morning in the Queen's Park Observer, and the idea that Andrea Horwath is fighting the campaign on two fronts.
Yeah, I think I'm already hearing feedback from some high level New Democrats. So this is like a moving story. And essentially the knives are out. It's sort of this 901 club, a bit of a play on what happened to Christy Clark over in BC in 2013. There was this organized push to get her out as leader at 8:01 the moment polls closed over there in BC. It's 9:00 here in Ontario. So it's sort of the 901 club. The moment polls close, if Andrea Horwath doesn't deliver, she doesn't form government, or worse, loses official opposition status to the Liberals, the pressure is going to be on for her to either step aside or, bring in an interim leader and then have a leadership race. I should point out Horwath tends to score high marks when during their regular leadership reviews. The party does that quite often. Earlier this year, she got 85%. That's a stellar mark. She tends to poll higher popularity wise than her own party. But there are people who aren't happy with how things are going right now. And I think that that there's genuine fear. Obviously, these are some current and former New Democrats, and they still believe in the party brand, the party policies, what they have on offer, but they're kind of laying it at Horwath's feet as to why they haven't been able to perform better. In 2018, it was a change election. The Liberals were decimated. Ford won a sweeping majority. I don't think that surprised anyone, but it was maybe a chance for the NDP to take even more seats, reduce the PCs to a minority. Of course, there's suggestions that could happen again. There's been a lot of nomination drama and concerns over how Horwath handled it. One of the issues that's come up is Paul Miller, Hamilton MPP, who's now actually suing the party over his ouster. Horwath, initially didn't tell us the reasoning why that happened, and that just kind of fueled more negative headlines on it. It gave that story oxygen. Kevin Yard, when one of the few Black MPPs who represents Brampton North, he faced this rare nomination challenge that most incumbents don't. He lost his seat, and that was a pretty public display of dissatisfaction from a lot of the Black Caucus members, former staff, and NDP members, who basically said that they didn't call out Horwath by name, but they said, this is a problem with leadership, and, that leadership that claims to, push anti-racism and anti-oppression. So, a lot of dirty laundry on display in this story. And I think, this could end up galvanizing some Horwath supporters. Obviously, with Christy Clark, she ended up turning out a majority victory. And so, this could end up working out in Horwath's favor, too.
Yeah, except that, I think that the difference here is this is the fourth kick at the can, John. And seriously, we've talked about this often. And certainly, I understand that during the pandemic, that the premier takes up all the oxygen because we're faced with a public health disaster and a crisis. But I still think that Andrea Horwath, as the leader of the opposition, in those moments, failed her party. She failed as the opposition leader. In terms of not just being an NDP leader, she was the leader of the official opposition and should have been more vocal and more present. And I get why, it was a challenge. But if you're not up to being the leader of the opposition during a crisis, she wasted, to your line, she wasted a good crisis.
Yeah, I just think people just tire after a while and they want to see something new in politics. We know Andrea Horwath. We know the NDP. And you're just tired of the brand and the person who's there. There's nothing exciting about it whatsoever. Look, politics is entertainment. For 90% of the people that go to the polls, they know very little about what you and I and Sabrina talk about. We hang around Queen's Park or we hang around the personnel. My God, I was in the legislature as a parliamentary intern when Bill Davis was still making speeches, and Bob Welsh and all those people. That's a lifetime ago for most people in politics. Most people never step inside of that place. They just get, they hear something that's on the news and they get a very visceral impression of who the leader is. Okay, so they've had 4 kicks at the can and they've said no. And, now we have Andrea Horwath, who I just want to say, let's go back to the last campaign and where we were at this stage in the last campaign. She was leading. She was leading in the campaign at this stage and then lost it out. There were people who said there's absolutely no way that Doug Ford ever win. None. There was the Toronto, blustery buffoonery Ford that people had seen before and how he won. It was, the leadership was seen as a complete fluke. Well, we ended up where we did, and it goes to him. You got to say, for all of the things that you could say against Doug Ford, to where he is today, he's done really well. He's gone through a crisis. One of the most absurd questions yesterday was to the premier, and he said, now I'm going to ask, it was the moderator said, I'm going to ask everybody this question, but Premier, how would you rate your performance during the pandemic? Goodness me, what kind of a ridiculous question is that? Okay, so he hit it out of the park, but he's matured. He is a politician. In fact, in some ways,
he's evolved. He is evolved.
Okay. Well, whatever you want to say, he's better than he was before. He's gone through this. People got to know him. He's kind of benign. He's not like people thought he would be. So he's earned that. Andrea Horwath, getting back to her, there's nothing there. It's all old. There's nothing new. It's always the same. And in fact, seeing them on the stage yesterday, Andrea Horwath and Stephen Del Duca were kind of agreeing with each other, 70% of the time. So her time's come and she should go. As I said, Mike Schreiner, if I were the NDP, I'd be recruiting him over to replace her. I don't know whether that would ever happen. But it's time that she's out of there. And I suspect what's going to happen is that she's going to lose a whack of seats and she's going to, on election night, stand up and say, thanks, it was a great run. See you later. Time for the party to reunite around somebody new. Mike Schreiner, take a shot at it. Good night. I think that would be the best of all circumstances for her.
The only thing that I would, just in closing and just on Horwath, I think that what surprised me almost in the first day or 48 hours of this campaign, Sabrina, is she was saying, we are the only party who can defeat Doug Ford. That sounded like, the comment you would make 3 days before Election Day. That last desperate stab at, avoiding splitting the vote. We're the only party. So if you're going to defeat Doug Ford, you got to vote for us. She's already, gone nuclear. I don't think she has any bullets left.
That's just the thing. And I think even we didn't really get much time to talk about Stephen Lecce, apologizing for his frat days and slave auctions, that story from Press Progress. But, the NDP is calling for him to resign. And I think that's one of those weapons that you have to time properly when you're opposition leader. They've called for so many ministers to resign over things. And after a while hearing that, it just kind of loses the gravitas behind that. So I think you're right. I think it's not the first time we're going to hear that from Horwath. But I think that is, the split between the Liberals and the NDP at the end of the day is just working out in Doug Ford and the Conservatives' favor.
The one thing I just want to reiterate from yesterday is that there just is no sense of urgency here. There is a desperate group of people in Ontario and across the land. And what we're hearing this morning, is that gas prices are going to go down a few cents. Oh, my God, the cheering that's going to go out there for a 3-cent drop. But it's going to go back up again. I mean, there's a group of people that should be either represented by the Liberals or the NDP that are just not getting the voice. There are people who are earning minimum wage, who want to own a home, who are desperate out there because of inflation, who don't want to wait, until the fall to have a gas tax, reduced or anything. They want it now. And when I saw this, I understand it's the north. God, I've been in the far north, way up in Canada, and to try and see what the cost of a quart of milk is incredible. But they're talking about, cottages and people coming up on the weekends and disturbing people, and stuff like that. It's not the desperate stuff that people need to know about now. And I wonder whether or not in the back part of this campaign, whether we're going to have somebody, as I said yesterday, who basically says, I'm calling the legislature back on the second day after the election campaign. We're going to get to work. We're going to reduce this and this and this. There's no anger. There's no there for that constituency. And it's not up to the Ford government to deliver it, but it sure isn't in the belly of the opposition. And you would think that it would be there, and it's just not there. It's very respectful. It's very benign. And that's not how you win election campaigns, in my view, especially when there's a crisis next door. The house is burning. You want to do something. And what you're doing is saying, look, 14 to 20 years ago in that range, somebody went and did something stupid and we want them to resign. Like, get a life, get on the page of a group of people who need help in this society and get rolling. And it's not there.
Well, even to that point, though, Sabrina, I mean, let's face it, the tone of that debate yesterday, let's just bring it back to this, was dictated by the municipality organization. I mean, these should have been, to John's point, not about whether or not, North Bay gets the same kind of taxation rights that Toronto has. It should be back to, holy cow, it's a whole lot harder to live in North Bay than it is in Toronto, and they get way more of the oxygen in your attention. Even to frame a question like that, there was none of that there. So the municipal leaders are falling down on this as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because don't forget, after Ontarians go to the provincial polls in June, there's municipal elections coming up in October. And I think we'll see more of that, hard-hitting, let's say, questions in next week's debate, the province-wide debate. I'm hoping for that. But, to John's point, I think that some of that fire in the belly attitude might actually spur more thoughtful promises from all the parties. Like, we've been talking a lot on this pod about ODSP rates, and actually now that's something all parties are promising. And the PCs were kind of forced to go on the offensive over that after the Liberals put out their platform promising the same thing, different timeline as the NDP. A 20% rise in ODSP rates, which are under $1,200 a month for a single person. Virtually, just a paltry amount that doesn't really get you much. And the PCs are now promising 5%. So they were kind of forced to go on the offensive there. It felt like a last minute announcement. Of course, it wasn't in the budget that serves as the re-election platform. It was announced via press release and a statement. This is a flashy, good news announcement. You'd think they'd want to have a lot of fanfare around it, especially because the Conservatives, I should say small C Conservatives, tend to have this reputation of not being very compassionate. So this also speaks to, the new Ford 2.0. And it just came in a press release, like in an email to our inboxes, and there was no in-person announcement, no initial budgeting for it. And so I think if we can get the opposition parties to have more innovative policies, of course we've got most of the platforms from people, but we've seen the Fords kind of change tact a little bit. So I think it's still early, and if we start to see more vote grabbing policies like that, then this could end up being a bit more of an exciting campaign, and I guess less on the boring side.
Well, I think we're, to John's point, though, is that, promises, whatever. Where's the action? I mean, who's walking the walk here?
Well,
right?
You got to, though, hand it to the Tories and say that Corey and Nick, who are running that campaign, are doing fine. They're running a good campaign.
For sure.
I mean, they got a front runner campaign. They've got all the numbers the way they want to go. If anything, one poll says they're up a couple of points, another poll says they're down a couple. They're right there. Everything's steady Eddie, keep going and stuff like that. It is, however, the last 2 weeks of the campaign, the last 10 days, as I said at the outset of the campaign, the public takes a hard stare. It's like walking into a bar. You can feel it in the numbers. It happens usually after the second debate. It lasts a couple of days where those people who have not made up their mind, or those people who have tentatively made up their mind, suddenly turn and look at the candidates in a very hard way. Lasts about a couple of days, and then they've made up their mind, and nothing changes after that. We've seen it campaign after campaign after campaign. So right now, no one's really paying attention. They're more concerned about the day-to-day stuff in their lives. Oh, my goodness, look, it's going up to 23 degrees today. Let's all get out and put shorts on. First day that's where everybody's head is at. So we're all kind of spinning around the coffee cup right now, and it's not where everybody else is at. But there will be a time, and if you are not noticed, or if you have not cut through as an opposition leader by that time, then it's just going to ride out the way it is right now. So the way I see it is the Tories are fine. They're doing really well right now. Just catch the ball, throw it back to the pitcher. Everything's just fine. The other two parties, I think Stephen Del Duca's got a job to do, but he's got the edge now where he's above where the NDP is. And the question is, did that platform yesterday give him some confidence to move forward and to start cutting like a knife through some of this other stuff? Buck a ride worked. Question is there anything else in the tank that gets you out there? We'll see.
Yeah, indeed. All right, that'll do it for today. We'll be back at it again tomorrow here on The Writ Race. John Wright from Maru Public Opinion and Sabrina Nanji. You can read her in the Queen's Park Observer. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network.